Hello everyone, it's Krista Watson here from Krista Quilts, and in today's video I'm going to show you how to quilt two walking foot quilting designs that are closely related. One of them is more regular and the other one is irregular and imprecise. I bet you can't tell which one I prefer. These are called diagonal crosshatch and irregular diagonal crosshatch. So let me show how I plan out and quilt them both. Let's take a look and grab a practice sample to follow along. Diagonal crosshatch and irregular diagonal crosshatch can be found as designs number 6 and 7 in the book. For precise placement of your lines when you're doing diagonal crosshatch, you'll want to draw out every single line that you stitch. In the book, I've shown you a color-coded diagram that gives you suggestions of which lines you might want to draw and then stitch first. However, on my sample that I show you in just a minute, I'm just going to stitch them across from side to side. For diagonal crosshatch, this is very similar to a previous design that I showed you called regular crosshatch, but with a diagonal crosshatch, as the name implies, I'm actually rotating and stitching on the diagonal. Now, because I want this design to be more precise, I will actually draw out every line that I'm stitching on the sample. If you want more of an organic look, you don't have to draw them out, and then that would be a different design as well. Just remember, there's never any design that's wrong. There are just different variations of the same idea, and that's half the fun of it. So while I'm stitching these straight lines using my integrated dual feed, this is basically the same technique as walking foot quilting. It performs the same function, but my machine has a built-in mechanism that allows me to switch out different dual feeds. So I actually think it's easier to use than a walking foot, but it's the same idea that I'm stitching these lines in one direction. So first of all, I'm stitching anchor lines to secure the quilt. Then I can go back and add as much additional quilting as I want to, and the quilt isn't going to shift on me. Now, I usually don't quilt all the lines at one time because I want to distribute the bulk of the quilting as I go, and I want to determine at any time whether I want my lines to be more closely spaced together or further spaced apart. So if I start with more widely spaced lines, I can always add more lines later. So when I am stitching straight lines, I actually increase my stitch length to make them a little bit longer. Now on my machine, my default is 2.5 for just regular stitching. So I increase that to 3.0, and this helps compensate for any friction and drag on the quilt. The stitches still look good, but they don't end up shrinking up and being those teeny tiny stitches that looks like they're hard to take out. So really the stitch length thing, that's just a personal preference. As long as your stitches look good overall, you can really experiment to see what you like. So in this sample, I'm just stitching one pass of straight lines in both directions because it's pretty small, but again, this would be the same process to fill in the space with additional lines on a larger quilt. I'm also stitching these out pretty quickly, so my lines are a little bit wavy and wobbly. They're not staying exactly in the center of each marked line, but again, if I wanted to focus on precision, I could just slow down and make sure each line is stitched precisely. Once I've anchor quilted lines in one direction, then I'll rotate the quilt and anchor quilt the lines in the other direction. You'll see, of course, that I'm stitching these lines diagonally across the quilt. However, from my perspective, I'm always stitching in one direction. Now, I'm doing like a 45-degree angle, which is a true diagonal across the quilt. But if you wanted to, you could do a 30-degree angle or a 60-degree or a totally random angle, and that would look cool too. The idea with these regular lines is that they're regularly spaced, and so there's as much distance between each line as every other line to make it look more of a systematic pattern. Marking the lines makes it much easier to quilt the rest of the lines and to keep them all even. A regular diagonal crosshatch is much more forgiving to quilt. You can either draw out your lines at any angle, or you can just use the seam lines as a guide as you stitch. You still want to lay down one set of lines that are going to be your anchor lines, and then you can go back in and fill in between. Now in the illustration, I've drawn them at even more of an angle, and the arrows, the colored arrows, kind of indicate a suggested quilting order, but of course that's completely up to you and how you want to do it. Quilting the irregular diagonal crosshatch stitching is similar to the diagonal crosshatch that was evenly spaced that I just showed you, except for the fact that the lines don't have to be perfectly spaced or even. I actually prefer this irregular look much more than marking lines. So with this design though, for my sample, I started by quilting the marked anchor lines on my quilt. These represent the seam lines on my quilt that I will use as a guide. So if I have evenly spaced blocks on my quilt, my anchor lines will be an evenly spaced grid. If my lines are uneven or I want to change up the pattern a little bit, my anchor lines will be unevenly spaced. So either way is totally fine. The fun pattern comes when you add lines in between these previously stitched lines. So just watch me for a little bit as I quilt the lines in both directions. It can be a little tedious, so what I normally like to do is I'll listen to an audiobook or a podcast. I'll just pop something in, maybe some nice music, and I'll just stitch for a while. If I get bored, I will just stitch up a few lines in one direction, a few lines in another direction, and then keep going back and forth. Or if you want to be more methodical, you can stitch all of the lines in one direction, rotate the quilt, and stitch all of them in another direction. The fun thing about this design is that no matter how you stitch it, if you quilt the same idea on more than one quilt, it's going to look different because the number of lines you quilt and how much you're going to space them out is going to look different. And again, you can change the angle of your lines. My hands act like a hoop, and as long as I keep the area in between my hands nice and flat, I'm not going to have any problems as I quilt. So when doing this on a real quilt, it's the same technique. I'm just quilting longer lines, but again, it's just one line at a time. Also, of course, on a real quilt, I prefer to use a blending thread so that you see the texture rather than the individual stitches. On this high contrast thread sample, you can see every imperfection, but the nice thing about it is you can see the technique and then you can just fill in the space with additional quilting. But you know what? No matter what thread color you use, as long as you quilt it densely, all you'll notice is lots of yummy texture. Here's my finished sample after I've added all the irregular diagonal crosshatch lines. Isn't it amazing what you can do with simple straight lines? Now, if wavy lines are more your thing, you can take that diagonal crosshatch and you can stitch them with a wavy line instead. That's exactly what I've done on this quilt behind me called lattice work. It's a little bit more irregular, freeform, and a little bit faster. And basically what I did is I used the sashing in between the blocks to tell me how wide to start my first set of lines, then I added more lines. Just remember, any walking foot design you see can be quilted 3 ways, with straight lines, wavy lines, or even decorative stitches. Now, one thing that's on my bucket list, which I haven't yet done, is combine straight lines and wavy lines in the same quilt. I guess I better go make another quilt. Well, if you want to get more tips and tricks for the whole process, be sure to check out the description box and stay tuned for more fun videos to come. I'll see you around.